I'm Joe Bevelacqua.
And I'm Brian Cappiello.
This is Preachers in Cars.
Getting coffee.
Preachers in Cars Getting Coffee. This is the first week of March 2025 in the year of our Lord 2025.
There's a lot going on, Pastor Joe.
Sure is. It's a busy world, isn't it?
Yeah, we've had it was a great Sunday at church. The week was eventful.
Yeah, sure was. Yep.
I don't know if you saw what happened with, I know you saw
Yeah.
what happened with President Trump and the Ukrainian leader,
Yeah.
Zelensky,
Yeah,
and how all of that played out.
that was awesome.
Yeah, that was something where I honestly, not just jump straight into politics,
Let's do it.
but I was so happy because it demonstrated. I'm not happy with how it played out. I wanted the minerals deal to get signed. Obviously, we want peace as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Gambling with World War III is not something we are fans of.
Right.
However, what that demonstrated to me was that we have, again, a leader who will stand up for the American people and for what he believes is right and what's best for the country and best for the world.
Yes.
I know that Zelensky wants a commitment of ground troops from America to be on there and wanted to do those negotiations in front of the American media. But and not just the president, but you could feel the support from the vice president.
Mm-hmm.
You could see Marco Rubio sitting there like he just got the rug pulled out from underneath him. The whole cabinet in support, and really the country in support, at least the majority of the country.
Yeah, the majority.
What was your take on that from a leadership perspective, from a standing on your values perspective, and just kind of, because it was one of the biggest things that happened throughout the week, and in this escalation of this war, this is a critical moment in not just American history but world history because of what it could lead to. What was your take kind of on what President Trump, how he handled that and how he did that moving forward?
Well, of course, I believe in peace through strength. I think that the way he handled himself, you could see him exercise maximum restraint. If I was President Trump, I wouldn't want to beat that little pipsqueak. Stop. How about this? I don't want anybody speaking over the American president.
Yes.
If it's Barack Hussein Obama, if it's Joe Biden, I'm sorry. If you come into the White House, into the Oval Office, do not speak over with this little wussy, what, you don't understand about. I don't like that junk. I think that that's disrespectful. And I don't want to hear anything about cultural differences. No. Welcome to our culture, the culture that's bankrolling this junk.
Yep.
And so, no, you're going to have to come in and eat a little humble pie, be a little hat in hand. But of course, he wasn't wearing a hat. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing lounge clothes.
Which that in and of itself, to me, is
what
so
a
disrespectful.
What he's doing is he was an actor, and he's acting.
That's right. He's
acting like he just came from the front lines for a quick break because he needs some reprise and some fuel. Yeah, and this is the problem with all of this is that there are layers of deception.
Yes.
And I do believe that he and the Bidens and others have profited from this war. The warmongers do it, certainly. But here's the layers of deception that maybe are the most... So deception's a funny thing. You don't know what you don't know. And for me, as a serious student of prophecy, I look at Russia as one of the players in the end times.
Right.
That Rush Magog, if you will, Russia. I believe that is a proper name in the Bible, and it's talking about Russia. Magog. And then who is Gog of Magog? Gog is the leader, the prime minister, if you will, of Russia. Gog of Magog, prime minister, Russia. That's in essence what it's talking about. And these things have been prophesied as far back as Daniel in the Old Testament and are referenced in the New Testament. And of course, we know that there will be a bait set in the bear's mouth, the great bear of the north. This is prophetic language, and it's speaking about Russia. So when I think about this, it's very interesting because I'm no fan of Russia per se. Like I'm a fan of the Russian people. I like Tetris. Great architecture. But Russia is going to be a player in the end times, and not necessarily even your garden variety citizen, though there will be at least a constituency within Russia that will be supporting a war that is going to be against God's chosen people, Israel. And it will be a war that will be played out. It will be played out in such a way that America, I believe, will be involved. I believe will be involved decisively. People have asked in the last year or so, since this all broke out, is this the Gog-Magog war prophesied in Ezekiel 36, 37, 38? No, it's not, because that's where all nations will come against Israel proper. And of course, you're seeing the beginnings of that. You're seeing the setup for that. So even though I don't believe that it is that prophesied war proper, some of the things that are happening have been prophesied. Gaza being in absolute ruins, prophesied. And that was thought to be, no, that's ridiculous. You just watch. Keep your eyes on the city of Damascus in Syria. And I'm hearing nobody I've heard talk about this in particular. It's going to happen. It'll be destroyed in kind with Gaza. It'll be an absolute ash heap. And that's something that's prophesied. When you read prophecy in the Bible, you're reading history before it happens.
Right, yeah. This is going to happen. And all of how much prophecy has been fulfilled. We know that already. This is going to happen.
And it's playing out before our eyes on the theater of the world stage in a way that it never has before. So let me say, I'm no fan of Putin. I think Putin is a bruiser. He's a jerk. And he
I don't
invaded.
think anybody is making the case of the defense of Putin.
Correct. So here's the tricky part with all of it. The layers of deception. So I don't want to be deceived like America was deceived into thinking that they had no part to play with World War II. And then we got attacked on our soil, of course, by the Japanese, and that officially entered us into what became to be called World War II. So you have to understand, when Trump is saying you're toying with World War III, he's not kidding. And don't forget, they didn't declare we are now calling this World War II. They didn't do that.
You're right.
But if you look at the world stage, because of the weak, feckless leadership of that demented old man, Joe Biden, you have war all over the world right now. And so all it takes is a couple of small things, a couple little matches to get lit, and the powder keg explodes, and all of a sudden we're dragged into something awful.
Yep.
Now, I don't want to be fatalistic and think that because something could be awful, it has to be awful, and so we need to face anything that's hard. No, that's not the solution either. There's layers of deception here. And so Ukraine is not helpless. And further, it's not our job to defend them. They are not part of NATO. And all of this junk about the great merits of President Zelensky. Zelensky is an actor. Zelensky is a poor leader. It's what made it so that it opened opened them up for Russia to attack. And it's because we, the CIA, the FBI, these people that are in so much good light these days, right? The CIA was part of a coup that was thrown in 2014 in the Obama administration because the prime minister of the Ukraine got along fine with Russia, and we didn't like that. And so this is where, here's another layer of deception. Your Tucker Carlson has a belly full of that stuff, and he thinks, what a bunch of crap. And so we need to stop doing all of that. And so then there's these people that are isolationists. Okay, the solution to the problem, what's the problem? America policing the whole world. The solution to that problem is not, ironically, being an isolationist, being someone who doesn't get involved in anything. We do need to be involved, but there's the question. There's the rub. To what degree? And the way that all this policing of the world has been justified, it's been justified by people simply saying, well, it's in our national security interest to make sure that this, that, or the other doesn't happen. And so we toy with things and end up creating formidable enemies. This is what created the radicalized, pause. We did not create radical Islam. Islam is radical. But you provoke people like Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, and many others in the Middle East to come after us because we interfered with a lot of what was going on.
Yes.
And so here's the punchline, I guess, to all of it is these are perilous times. There are wars, there are rumors of wars, and there are great deceptions that are happening all the time. And these deceptions, you have to look at them. The Bible says that in the last days, even the elect would be deceived.
That's right.
And so when I hear Trump talk about America's going to have Gaza, which is going to happen, okay, and Bibi Netanyahu is saying, oh, this is great, I'm all in support of it. I think that they're in support of it because they have foregone that, and it's better than the status quo of what has happened. That's a pragmatic solution, but that's not the spiritual solution. Therefore, it's not pragmatic at all. That is, that land is deeded to the Jews eternally. It will be their land forever. That is right now, during the millennium, and during eternity, when God incinerates the earth and recreates it. That area, where whatever the GPS coordinates are of that, that's theirs.
Yeah, it's covenant.
Don't mess with that. And so I hope, and I'm praying to God, that Trump says that, saying, in essence, he's going to go in there and get those guys out, restore that land, get all the dangerous things out, and give it back to Israel. Because if he means that that's going to become a territory of the United States, God have mercy.
Yeah.
And President Bush, he made negotiations with the Prime Minister of Israel, and it was to create Gaza, not create it, but to create it as its own entity, to forego that as being part of Israel. And they kicked out the people that were living there who were Jews. It was an awful solution. And it was, in essence, trying to give them a two-state solution, which they've been offered dozens of times and have rejected it every single time because they're bruisers. And so to try to come up with compromise, it's not going to work. Here's the compromise. Get off the land now. When I was in Israel, I ascended the Temple Mount, and I had brought with me a stone from my front yard. I brought with me a little piece of brick from the church, from the face of the church. And I had taken a couple little pebbles from the Temple Mount to bring home with me, and I wanted to leave the pebble from my front yard and that piece of the brick. Well, just as I was leaving it, my tour group was leaving, and this Muslim who was on top of the Temple Mount proper, I'm on the Temple Mount complex, he's looking down at me as I'm burying them, and he says, he thinks I'm taking them. I'm actually leaving them. I already took what I needed to take. Yeah. And he says, leave it. And I about wanted to start an international incident in that moment and say, no, you look at me, buddy, you leave it. You leave it now. And anyway, here's what I'm trying to say. Here's the solution for peace. Get off the land. There's no brokered peace with a two-state solution. Ain't gonna work because they will not accept it. Mm-hmm. And so you need to get them all inside buses and caravans and bring them back to where their genetic ancestors are from. Mm-hmm. The Arabian Peninsula, Egypt, and Jordan. That's where they're allowed to be. Get out of Gaza. And if you want to start another fight, which frankly, from my high horse over here in Grand Rapids, I could care less. Jordan doesn't belong to Jordan. Part of Iraq doesn't belong to Iraq. That property is deeded to the Jews. And you cannot talk God out of it. He is the Lord and he changes not.
Yes.
He's not a man that he should lie. And so these people have been living in the Bronze Age because they will not yield to that. And God would respect them. God respected the Pharaoh of Egypt. He gave them 10 opportunities to repent. And eventually it consumed them to the spot where it's like, let the Jews go. And that's exactly what will happen. I digress, but here's the idea. Gog of Magog, the leader of Russia, will come against the Jewish people, and we will be involved at that point. And so what you're seeing in the news today, it might be the rumblings of all of that. And I don't think that peace is appeasing dictators. Mm-hmm. Wasn't it Churchill who said, how many times do we have to realize that you cannot negotiate with a lion when your head is in its mouth?
Yeah.
And so appeasing dictators and giving them what they want and large stretches of land and privileges, that is not the solution either. I don't think that's what Trump is looking at, but what he has is this little weenie. And that's what Zelensky is. He's a wiener. Yep. He's not a real leader. And he's in there, the most ungrateful little jerk you've ever seen in your life, begging for more money. And if we don't do it, we're wrong.
Right.
Well, guess what? This is what Trump meant. You don't have the cards in your pocket. You gotta shut your mouth, come in your hat in hand, wear some clothes, wear a suit of clothes when you go into that Oval Office. And you ought to ask and expect nothing. We don't owe you jack.
Yep.
We don't owe you jack. And if Ukraine falls, it's no skin off my hide. Now, should he begin to encroach on NATO countries, those that are part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that's a whole nother thing. Then we would have an obligation and should defend it, because that's what we said. Now, don't get me down to the rabbit hole of whether or not we should even be a part of that because of what it's become.
Yes.
Perhaps that's a problem. And this is where Tucker, who I like Tucker. I'm the only guy, by the way, who can make Tucker laugh in Grand Rapids. But
I've seen the proof.
Okay, think of this. NATO. We don't like NATO because we give so much money and they're not towing their own weight there. It's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. You know, we're on the other side of that ocean, as Zelensky pointed out. And so we need to realize that those guys have to bail water with us. I don't think that's the problem. For me is not NATO in and of itself. It is NATO and the rest of the people are not doing their fair share.
Yeah.
And if they don't take it seriously, it's looked at as, oh, well, boys will be boys. They can't. That's Europe. Well, they've got to do Europe. Well, no, they don't have to do Europe. You better do what you said you're going to do. And then if we don't do it, we're looked at as the bad guys.
Well, one thing that I have a problem with is that one of the original agreements was that NATO was not going to expand eastward, and then over 30 years, it continuously expanded eastward, leading up to, under the Biden administration, them declaring that Ukraine was going to become a part of NATO, which puts NATO on the border of Russia, which can send nuclear weapons into Moscow.
So the problem then becomes, who's Russia? I don't think that there's a big movement to have Russia become part of NATO, because Russia, they're not purely European. And what's so wild is they're considered European, but most of Russia sits right on top of the East.
Right.
And so Russian culture, which I understand very little, it has some elements of the West. It has some. It has some elements of the East, but it has some things that are uniquely Russian.
Right.
And to understand Russia, which again, I understand very little.
Yeah, I'm on the same page.
When I thought about Russia, I was like, ew. You know, all I think about is Stalin and Marx, and I think about the most sterile place on earth. This is all communism, and before that, socialism, and ugh. But you have to go back to Anastasia. You have to go back to the royalty and the dynasty. That's where they were considered part of Europe. In fact, part of the current royal family shared a cousin, and they were almost identical. I think it was King George V, and his cousin was the Tsar of Russia, the king of Russia, if you will. And they had their own monarchy, and it was considered very European. But they yielded to some more of that Eastern concepts. You know, China is socialist, Marxist, communist, and it's gone to the depth of red communism. But the East doesn't have a problem with that as much. Now, it is problematic. It's not good. It's not good for people. But they don't have a problem with it as much. And so Russia yielded to a little bit more of that Eastern sensibility and the academics. Well, Tsar is a very interesting term. Tsar, okay, think about in the Old Testament, in the book of Daniel again, Nebuchadnezzar.
Yep.
A czar is a signet of royalty. Tsar, and then Rex or Regna in India, they'd call it the Raja. It's this royal component. In fact, when Queen Elizabeth would sign, she'd sign Elizabeth R, and that is Regna. That's the female Rex, and it's the czar component of royalty. When that fell, it fundamentally changed the culture of Russia. Here's what I mean. We don't trust them. We don't trust you because you're socialist. Forget the fact that America has been socialist since the New Deal, but we don't trust your brand of socialism. We don't like it.
Yes.
And I get it. I don't look at Putin and think trustworthy,
No.
nor do I look at Obama or Biden. So I get it. We don't want to be part of our club. But then when you encroach closer and closer, when you said that you wouldn't, these things are threatening.
Yes.
And that threat puts everybody on edge.
If Russia had an alliance with Mexico where they were going to put long-range hypersonic ballistic missiles that had nuclear tips on the border of Mexico and the U.S., do you think that our leadership would tolerate it?
We didn't tolerate it with the Bay of Pigs.
Yep.
So there's your answer right there. And so this goes back to, and as a pastor, I have to say, I have to preach, and when I preach, I need to preach systematic theology. In other words, if I say God is good, I cannot say that God in a sterile way controls everything. We've talked about this before.
Yes.
You have to have a system. It all has to work. You can't say one thing and it violates another. Okay? So you can't say that we need to not interfere with Ukraine and Russia at all, and also celebrate taking over Greenland and Gaza.
Yeah.
So this is systematic philosophy, not systematic doctrine or systematic theology. This is systematic philosophy. You can't be like, we're going to take Greenland and we have no business being a part of anything in Ukraine. Okay, I hear what you're saying. Well, it's part of our national security to take over Greenland. That's important. And we're going to take over Gaza. You're going to buy it? No, we're just going to have it. You can't do that and then also say that it's not important. This is where the left, and it's not, they're more pickled than us by far, but they're so ridiculous. They're anti-helping Israel in any way. They're pro-Palestinian, which is the most evil thing on earth. There is no such thing as Palestine.
Pro-Hamas.
They're pro-Hamas terrorism. And then they're also pro-Ukraine, but they can't understand why we would support Israel at all. So these are not simplistic subjects.
A lot of variables.
There are a lot of variables,
Yep.
and they have to do with geopolitics. This is for certain. And this is where I can find agreement with all of my Republican friends, is America first. And MAGA, absolutely, all of that. How could you be a Christian or be an American and say we need not make America great again? I mean, that it just is a statement, right? So then you think that's political policy. But what I'm looking at is there's layers to the onion. There's deception at play on both ends. And then I look at the prophecy and I think this is all beginning to unfold. And don't think that you can do one thing and it doesn't affect another. That's geopolitics. And that's also how God, the great mind of God, understands how it all plays together, and it all will play together.
Yeah. I also want to ask you, we've seen increasingly so an exposure of corruption,
Yes.
of fraud and waste,
Mm-hmm.
and it appears, you see the establishment, legacy media,
Yes.
having an antibody response to it.
Yes.
It is a violent response to Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency, and it's been pretty remarkable, some of the receipts that have come out, where essentially, I mean, I'll take, and it just, we can take this for a bit, we can go as far down the rabbit hole as you'd like to.
Yeah, let's go.
But as an example, you have George Soros, who, if you're watching this, if you don't know who George Soros is, just Google his name. It's a rabbit hole you can go down for a couple of hours. It'd be very fun. George Soros has a non-government organization, an NGO that he creates. He uses lobby money to lobby government officials, and all of a sudden that NGO is receiving hundreds of $1 million in federal grants, as one example of how the system is being cheated. Some of those Department of Government Efficiency heads have said that it's the biggest scam. It's $1 trillion scam, the biggest scam of all time.
Yes.
What are you seeing? Because from my perspective, I am very encouraged. I'm praying for the safety of the people involved, because I think that there could be threats on their lives.
Yes.
But it is encouraging to see, when the cabinet started getting appointed, I told you, I think you agreed, this this is the best chance for real change and real reform, at least in my lifetime that we've ever had. What's your take on all of it? What are you seeing? What are you seeing is going to happen next? What's your take?
Well, this is a continuation of what began in 2020 with COVID. And what it was is in the 7 mountains of influence, there have been, how to put it, there's been this same type of thing where they're being exposed. And so the medical industry, the military industry, the education, all of these different mountains of influence, even the religious mountain, right? All of these things, there's been an element of being exposed. And what it's done is it's made it so everybody who's a part of that mountain of influence and everybody who is in relation to it in the rest of culture, the rest of the mountains, they have to look at that and they have to make a decision. So in other words, there is incredible evidence that the created a problem with mitochondria, or not
Your DNA?
I'm sorry, no, it's the heart issue. It's the
the hypertension.
Anyway, it created the issue
My
with.
brother had a friend who died from that.
And so we'll have to bleep that out on YouTube because YouTube hates our guts. But here's the idea: is that it created a medical problem, and because of that, people were able to see the evidence. People were able to attend funerals. People were able to find reporting on it if they really wanted to. And then they had to make a decision. And some people wanted to reside in deception. And they wanted to make the leader of all of that, Mr. Jab himself, into their little mascot. And what they did is they wanted to play political games and take the side of, well, I just think this. And you got to follow the science. And it's their backwards science. But it has nothing to do with real hard science.
And don't question the science,
Right.
which in and of itself is
Not scientific.
the most ironic
Yes.
statement, because the scientific method is all about
Questioning.
forming
Yes.
hypotheses, questioning it, testing it,
Yes.
and then actually finding out what's true.
And so this has been happening for the last 5 years, and this is a continuation of all of that. Now what you're seeing is in insomnia, you're seeing the true zeitgeist, which is this connection in between government and media, government and other leadership, government and other mountains of influence, education, right? Trying to preserve itself like a virus, like a king. And so, yes, it's in some cases it's being reported. In other cases, it's being suppressed. But here's what I'm seeing, which is actually kind of encouraging. CNN has fired key people. NBC, MSNBC has fired key people that have been incredible liberal voices. Now, we need people to question. I am all in support of that, even though I think that some of Sam Donaldson's questions to President Reagan were just ridiculous. They were just ridiculous. He was just questioning for questioning's sake. It's good that every leader from every side should be questioned about things. However, that is not to say that you need to be paying them to fight against your political opponents. And that's what's been happening.
Yes.
And they have
That
found
should be baseline.
Yes, they found illegal ways to do that, and it's all being exposed.
Yes.
Follow the money. And this is a question that a lot of people had. Why in the world are they going after U.S. aid right away? I hadn't even heard of U.S. Why would they go after them first? Because it's the most known secret in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
It's known. That's the slush fund for corruption.
They said USAID. When something's too dirty for the CIA, give it to them.
And so follow the money. And so, yeah, I mean, you don't want Elon to be assassinated. You don't want other people to be assassinated. I think that John Kennedy, he was, a mixed moral man, but he also had a conscience, and he was trying to get to the bottom of some things. And I tell you what, the zeitgeist itself, it'll do anything it can to try to fight for its own survival. And so you see people like Soros create other problems. Mm-hmm. Racism, we thought in the 80s racism was gone. I mean, that's out of vogue. Why? I mean, there's some weird skinheads somewhere out there in the country but I mean, we're not dealing with racism. Right. And how did this become a thing again? It's because people like bad actors like Soros and others fed that. Mm-hmm. And one of the greatest race riots we ever had, I remember watching the Ferguson riots that were happening under President Obama, because they don't want to waste a good issue, a good calamity.
Use it for control.
Yes, and so we have to take a step back and question this whole thing and say, like, what is actually going on? What is the role of government? What is the role of local government? And we have to begin to unplug some of the things that we've just accepted. The greatest generation, the generation that fought and won World War II, they wouldn't have gone along with this junk. And so we have to take a step back and realize things are not as they should be. And even though things seem civilized, how in the world could a generation ago afford to float a whole family on one man's salary? How did that happen? How did we had roads and schools and fire protection and other things like that a long time before we had income tax, property tax in many cases.
Yes.
And so we have to begin to unplug these things. Yeah, and I think there needs to be a federal protection against zoning laws, because zoning absolutely will interfere with everything, and it becomes a police state. In fact, they go under police powers to tell us everything to do. What do we have to spend? Almost $2,000 on landscaping to get occupancy of our building.
Yep.
Well, no, we want you to make sure that we're safe. Well, no, we're doing city planning. Why don't you leave that up to the people who are leading the city, not people that just want to. What would ever inspire a person to wake up and want to assert themselves over another man's business is beyond me. And I'm saying that as a pastor.
Yep.
As a pastor, what in the world? Let's win this thing in the arena of ideas.
Yes.
And so we have to back up and say we need federal protection against property tax, excessive property tax. We need federal protection against certain zoning laws where it goes too far. We need some federal protection, because what is not expressly stated in powers given to the federal government, it still resides in the states. I believe that. But I think that in federalism, we need a little bit of checks and balances here, because it has gotten out of hand. And now we end up having to serve the government. We're slaves to our local government in order to make who happy? Who's happy here?
Yeah.
It's very cumbersome for a man to find a job. And at the same time, we have government people that can take these long vacations and live high on the hog. And we don't need overlords. I'm telling you, we don't need it. And so those are huge problems, and they're from the local level all the way on up. And so the corruption that Musk is revealing is very profound. And I pray to God that it doesn't stop, that we can solve these things, and that he unplugs enough that we're able to find resolve. And if you defund these aggressors, you're not going to have as much issue with them stealing your elections. You're not going to have as much issue with them being able to, they don't have the muscle. How would President Trump say? You don't have the cards.
Yeah.
And so if we can do that and iron out our elections, I think that we'll have longevity as a country.
I think we're going to have to pray for like you're saying, a resolve to that, because you're going to put these people in desperation mode.
Yes.
You cut off the tap of government money that's flowing towards them in the tunes of hundreds of billions of dollars.
Yeah. Now what?
And now they're going to be desperate, which is why I say I pray for their safety, for people like Elon Musk, who,
Yes.
you put those powerful people in desperation mode, and they'll do anything to protect themselves and the other people around.
Well, the reason why people are saying follow the money is it's not just that the money would go to an NGO, a non-government organization, a nonprofit, but then how does that money, why is that a bad thing, somebody says? Because it's not going to feed poor people.
Yes.
It's going to feed Elizabeth Warren and the rest of the people in her tribe who are getting rich off from the backs of Americans, and that's how you buy votes.
It wasn't just the incredible instinct for stock trading that the Pelosi's got all that money.
No.
I mean,
And
the
so-
incredible stock traders, I'll give them that.
So
better than anybody.
when people are talking about systemic problems, they mean systemic racism. No. Racism was largely dead. We were over that, and we still had some things to iron out. This is for certain. But it was largely dead. The systemic problem, this is where I was going, is a government problem. And when government gets involved in anything, it wilts. So we have systemic problems in education. Why? Because our federal overlords, by Jimmy Carter, who was a moral man, he was an awful leader. He couldn't lead his way out of a wet paper bag. That dude created the Department of Education, and it cost us from being number 1 in the world to being number 40. Okay? Why? I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And it created a systemic problem. We spent billions of dollars, and ultimately, what did it create? Ultimately, it created a dumber generation called the millennials. And then the byproduct of all that is the systemic problem of a teacher force that is looking out for themselves. Well, no, we would never strike. What do you call COVID? You wouldn't come back to work.
Right.
Now, there were godly teachers and even just teachers that loved their kids who weren't godly people who wanted to come back. But look at the problems they had in Chicago and in other pockets all around the nation. No, the systemic problem was an infamia, the government and the union working together.
Yeah, the TU.
Yes. And so these systemic problems follow the money. You follow U.S. aid. You follow where all of these politicians are getting rich. And there's a couple key things you can do. Cut the money, create term limits, iron out our elections, and all of a sudden you'll take your country back. And then problems that are cumbersome. And there are cumbersome problems like, what do we do about Ukraine? What do we do if Russia doesn't stop at Ukraine? Because what Zelensky's conveying is that if we sign a peace, it's a fake peace thing because they're not giving any concession. They just took over our land. Okay? You can get into the depth of all of that. But I think the point that a Trump and many others have is we have our own war within. And with friends like, I hate to say it, Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, when you have friends like that, you don't need more enemies. And so we have to get rid of that infamia, that systemic problem, the caphone that want to affect our everyday life, deal with them, cut them off from the money. And then in the arena, in the theater of ideas, when we're arguing what works best, they can argue their idea and we can argue ours. But you don't get a leg up from the government. We don't have to fund your idea. This isn't public radio, which don't get me on that. There should be no public radio or TV, but that's perhaps another podcast.
Amen. Well, and I'll tell you, every Christian should be praying for this.
Yes, because you want corruption exposed. To the person out there that's saying, well, what about the innocent people and what about the refugees? Okay, why is that America as a whole's responsibility if it's not your personal responsibility? You ought to shut your darn mouth if you don't have a refugee living in your house or even in your town. Well, what about the people who are immigrants who had to sneak through the border? No, they didn't. No, they didn't have to sneak through the border. They're not an immigrant, they're an alien, and they should be expelled, scripturally expelled. Now, if they are an immigrant, we should treat them very well. And even when we are deporting an illegal alien, we should treat them with human dignity. This is true. But to all those people, you want to be more merciful than Jesus, and you want to be merciful on everyone else's behalf, and you don't want to do it personally. And that, again, going back to a systematic theology or philosophy, you have a broken systematic philosophy. You take in a refugee and then lecture all the rest of us about how it's our responsibility. It's absolutely ridiculous. No, we don't need to do that. Not when we're not educating our children properly. Not when we are not living the American dream. And you think, well, it's all about money then. No, America bankrolled worldwide missions for 100-some years because of our prosperity. God blessed us. Because God blessed us, we were the people advocating along with, and we were the first people to diplomatically recognize Israel, and more blessing came. A blessed America means funded missions all around the world.
Right.
And these guys want to go on apology tour and they want to create equity of outcomes. I could, listen to me, care less about the outcomes of gender transitions in India at my expense. Not my problem. They can buzz off. It's not my issue. And it's not any of our issues. Here's what is my issue. As our country, we have to pray for us, and we have to, the compact that we have is that our resources would be used for our benefit. And so then you have to say, it's not just that you're on your own. It's that you could follow our example. It's not just that you're on your own. You should take our missionaries, because a blessed America is going to fund missions everywhere. And these people, I'm so glad to see Joy Reid unemployed. That fool. She doesn't even know what she's think. God forgive her. She doesn't know what she even thinks. But that woman has not led anything. Has not led anything. And that person, if she was left in charge over sweeping amounts of populace of people, she'd kill him. Kamala Harris would kill you because she can't lead herself, can't speak. And so We need to be people that are praying for discernment, because our leaders, they're not God. Trump's not God.
Right.
He needs prayer, especially with his approach to Gaza. We need to pray that the right people. I'm praying that old Franklin Graham talks to him. I'm praying that John Hagee talks to him. I'm praying that Jensen Franklin and many other great men of God
Right.
who have the president's ear speak to him about Gaza and what our policy could be. Because if we take it, get those occupiers off from Israeli land, fix the land, and gift it back to Israel, I think it'd be an incredible blessing to the United States.
Certainly.
We need to pray for discernment, because these are perilous times with wars and rumors of wars. And then we need to pray for evil to be exposed and revealed. And then it goes into the court of the popular opinion. People need to look at that and judge it dispassionately. I think I've shown that today, talking about Trump better do the right thing with Israel, right? You've got to judge it dispassionately. Don't go along with whatever the blue people, your little heroes over there are saying, or the little heroes in your party are saying. No. You judge it. And you say, is this what God would have? Because, friend, there's no such thing as Palestine. There's no such thing as Gaza. That's not what God calls it. God calls it Israel.
Yeah, now more than ever, we need a spirit of wisdom and revelation.
And the knowledge of Him.
Yeah.
So that's current events. And we got to nothing about renewing your mind, so renew your mind. But
that was the message.
But there's
today.
prophetic things that are happening. There's fireworks. And I think that people need to have a very discerning and prayerful heart as they approach these things. I, like everybody else, was high-fiving when I saw Zelensky get put in his place. But don't think that it's a simplistic solution. This is a very comprehensive problem, and it plays into prophetic events. Like, subscribe, woof.
Woof. Questions, send them to email them to connect@newchapel.com. If there's any topics you want to see us talk about, we've demonstrated that there's not a lot that is off limits.
Nope, it's all on the table.
And so we did not get to talking about the message yesterday about renewing your mind. Go to newchapel.com/watch. Phenomenal, honestly, a foundational sermon. Something really, it is part of what every Christian must do. But there was a lot that happened this week, a lot going on that was important for us to talk about this morning.
Invite somebody to church. Share this podcast with somebody else. We love you guys. We're praying for you. I'm Joe Bevelacqua.
I'm Brian Cappiello.
This is Preachers in Cars Getting Coffee.